This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 143 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amleth.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. Kevin, you've recently been thinking about career progression.
Yeah, so being a software engineer, there are multiple things that you can do to level up. You can go from like a junior to a senior to principal, or whatever the various levels are. But there's also other types of career progression as well, like engineering management, or you can go into like architecture type roles. And although we have like a lot of listeners that are from various skill sets, some of them may even switch over into software engineering, knowing what all of those different options are and whether or not something's right for you can be an interesting discussion. It's something that I've thought about in my own career, like where do I want to go? And I've heard of people going to one thing and coming back. And so it's something that's not talked about enough in software engineering, at least in my opinion.
So is this pertinent to your current career, Kevin? Because, you're not the youngest of men anymore. You're not old, but, you're kind of getting to a stage, surely, where you are pretty senior and so could go into management or architectural, you could progress, right?
Yeah, so this actually is pertaining to my own career. So within the past few months or year or so, I have taken more of a managerial type role, but I still like to have my fingers on the code. And I've also done things like team leadership and things of that nature. But as I start to like dip my toes into this other side, I'm also thinking like, is this right for me? What are the next steps? Should it be something more like architecture instead? So all of those types of things roll over in my mind. And I imagine like they can be rolling over in listeners' minds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might be worth us talking a little bit about what a dev manager does in their job and maybe some of those other jobs as well, because I think it's quite different in different organizations. So Kevin, you said you've been dipping your toe in some of it. So what kinds of things are involved in that type of job?
Yeah, it can be very different. And in fact, I would say depending on the organization and the size of the organization, if you're a very small startup, you may not have like very clear delineations between teams or management. And large organizations, the Microsofts or whatever of the world, it probably is entirely lost with all kinds of layers of management. So the ones that I've experienced have been more of the smaller side, but I would say medium-sized businesses. And in those, so in my experience, it has been more of pitched as like leading a team or setting the direction technically for a team, which it does include those things. But I would say as you start to move into more of a managerial type role, it also starts to include things like managing the people on your team. And management is kind of sounds like a pejorative, at least to me. And that's not really what we mean, but like guiding and mentoring the more junior developers, as well as setting and ensuring like career direction and growth is healthy. Team interpersonal communications are healthy. And, as issues pop up, like there's just all kinds of things that also go into management at that kind of a size where you have a team of, 15, 20, 30 people and managing all of those relationships and making sure products happen. And there's just a lot that goes on that's not actually code. So even though the job might include lots of architectural type decisions or senior coding, your time ends up getting taken up by a lot of other things like people managing too.
Well, yeah, by the time you have one-on-ones with everyone and you're dealing with like OKRs and KPIs and all of that bureaucratic nonsense, presumably there's not that much time left for the actual code itself.
I feel seen. You're describing me.
Yeah, definitely. I actually think that I wouldn't want to say this universally for all companies, but companies where dev managers are expected to do a significant amount of coding can be a real problematic pattern, right? Because it basically means not spending enough time looking after people, which is your primary role. I would say across the different organizations that I've worked in, it's been fairly universal that if you're a dev manager, if that's your title, or manager of any kind, that means you'll probably be doing performance reviews for people, right? So you'll be deciding how well they've done at the end of the year or end of 6 months or whatever the pattern is. And even if it's just that one thing, that comes with a whole lot of responsibilities, right? So for example, if you're going to have a difficult conversation with someone at the end of the year, that maybe they're not doing what they should be doing, if they only find out about it at the end of the year, then in my opinion, you're definitely not doing that job right. Like, it has to be ongoing feedback and helping people improve their performance before it becomes a problem. There's a significant amount of responsibility for things that can be, tricky things to handle as soon as you have that manager role.
That's so well said. And that's absolutely been something that I've seen personally. And even before any of these types of roles, like, I've had really good managers before that I felt really cared about me, my career, my time at that company, and helping me grow. Those are the ones that I really look up to and also try to emulate. But unfortunately, I've also had managers that were not that good. And I would say, at least in my own career, the ones that I would categorize as not that good managerial were the ones that tried to be, quote unquote, the best programmer on the team or the most senior knowledge, right? They focused more on that technical aspect and didn't really care about anybody on their team's career or their time in that company. And those are the ones that it's really difficult, because I like coding, right? I like programming. That's why I got into this industry. And to spend a lot of my time doing things that are not programming can sometimes feel like, oh, am I in the right spot, or are my skills being used appropriately? However, when I'm able to make an impact to someone on my team that has a positive review, or sometimes like when their reviews get better across the years, and making sure that all of the other leads in the company, that they have the appropriate like review schedules and that they are appropriately caring for their people, like, that makes a real difference. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, seeing people grow and like have a good time, not just at the job making money, making a widget, but like actually enjoying their time there and getting something personal out of it too.
The pattern of a manager who wants to be the biggest dog in the pack because of how great their coding skills are is just a really horrible pattern. I think some of the best teams that I've worked in have explicitly had a role like lead dev or tech lead or whatever you call it, which is the senior technical person who's definitely not the manager, and then the manager works kind of alongside them and is also their senior in terms of performance reviews and stuff like that. What I like about that is that it makes it explicit that the manager's job is to look after the people, and often that includes guiding technical decisions, right? Because just because someone's the tech lead doesn't mean that they shouldn't actually listen to what some other member of the team is saying or something like that. And often they need a bit of guidance in terms of dealing with people. But fundamentally, the value that the manager is bringing to the situation is not knowing the most or having the most coding experience. And there's someone else who has that role.
But at the same time, you do need to have coding experience, don't you, to be the manager of people who are writing code for a living?
That's a good question.
Yes, I would absolutely say that at the lowest level of management, or kind of like closest to the individual contributors, you do need to have a very close relationship with programming. Whether, I don't know that you would have needed to have been like a tech lead or the most senior programmer before, but I also don't think someone being in a managerial, like a engineering manager position with zero programming experience would be healthy either. However, like the further away you remove from that individual contributor, you get like either up the ladder into like executive positions. I think at that point that the value starts to decline. But at least at that lower level, 100%, I would say that progression of going from an engineer, senior engineer, into possibly like a tech lead role and then into something like management, that is a really good progression because you are intimately familiar with what the developers are still dealing with. And in all honesty, like at that lowest level, just like Andy said, it's sometimes really difficult to separate the people issues from the technical issues. So even when you have those roles split, which I agree is a good practice, but even when those roles are split, there are some things that are just not, like humans are messy. When you're making a technical decision, sometimes technical decisions get wrapped up with personal feelings or interpersonal communication styles with other team members. Like there's all kinds of stuff that gets messy and you can't just clearly make it a technical versus personal decision. So being able to opine or give some weight on those types of decisions from a managerial standpoint really, really does help, because if you check out and you come with none of that, then it's also easier for the engineers to kind of just write you off and say like, well, he doesn't know what I'm talking about anyway. So, and go to someone who they think can either arbitrate it or make those decisions.
Yeah, it must be difficult to empathize with a developer if you don't know how to write code. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in the particular language or framework or whatever that they are working in to manage people, presumably.
Well, I think empathizing is a good way of putting it, Joe. Like, I think that if you are an ex-programmer or a current programmer as a manager, it does give you a shortcut to understanding a lot of the kinds of stuff that's going on. I definitely wouldn't want to be as 100% as Kevin about this. I think that you can have really excellent managers who are focused on the people and know enough to know what they can trust and where they need to probe further without necessarily being ex-programmers or current programmers themselves.
Yeah, I think those people that have either very little to no programming experience being in the managerial part, I think if they are a level removed, then that's still okay. Because there are people, like I've had people in my own career that are just absolutely excellent people managers. They're very caring, very kind, very empathetic. And they also have good intuition, good experience on how to handle things and set different priorities. Like they're very good at that style of work and don't have a ton of programming experience. And I've worked very well with those people. They typically are paired with somebody that can also speak the programming portion of it. And I guess a little bit to Joe's point as well, you don't have to be the expert in whatever language it is, but I think it's important that you're able to spot the patterns and draw from previous experience and similarities. Those types of things are what's really valuable, and having none of that in your background to pull from that is related to programming would make that more difficult. That's not to say it's impossible, but it would make it much more difficult to help a team member like set some direction or know when they're going down the incorrect path and they need to go some other way, like to provide that argument, hey, you're going down the wrong path, and this is why you should go this other way, and this is what you should be looking out for, those types of things. It's difficult to do if you have none of that background to draw from.
Or to have realistic expectations as to how long things are going to take, for example.
Yeah, I think all this stuff comes with experience, right? So that doesn't necessarily have to be programming experience. So someone who's worked in the testing side or product side or something else who has experience in the software industry, they're actually going to bring perspectives that the developers maybe don't have. And that's going to make it difficult sometimes to understand what the developers are talking about. But also, like, that could be incredibly valuable experience, right? So imagine someone who worked through the testing side, became a manager, and then managed a mixed team or a development team. Then they're likely to bring quite a lot of a kind of real world. Or, you think this is a simple code change, but actually all these other things are going to break, like the documentation or whatever. They're going to have perspective that could actually be an addition and useful.
Mixed teams are actually a really good point. And that one is, I would say, a little bit difficult, but actually happens really often, where even if you have a manager who has programming experience, was a former developer, and everyone on that team may not also be a developer per se. There might be other skill sets in there, whether they be like network engineers or design or something like that. And you're right, Andy. I mean, that is bringing some different perspective into it, I think, is also healthy. I think if the team is majority made up of software engineers or developers, I do think that there is value in having a shared skill set, even if somewhere in the background, I guess. But I think you're right. You're convincing me that it is not as hard-lined as I was making it.
In my mind, it would need to be paired with a tech lead or lead dev who you really trust, right? That would be the kind of situation where I think it would work. And without that, if the development team start pulling the wool over the eyes of the manager, then you've got real problems.
Exactly. Yeah. Just being able to sniff the things out, I think, is important, because there are teams, I've worked with people before, that will absolutely just try to get one over on the manager, the team lead, whatever that company has. And being able to stop that or see that is pretty crucial.
On a previous development team, we had a tech lead who was a wonderful guy, very well-intentioned, and tended to be very empathetic, but he had his opinions and didn't hesitate to let you know them. But when presenting them, it was not particularly constructive. It was more, why aren't you doing this totally obvious thing that you certainly should already have known about? When you shouldn't necessarily have already known that, because why would you already know that? So it leads to, I'll phrase it how a coworker at the time phrased it. A little light bullying is what it felt like at times. And that's probably not great. That's kind of toxic.
Yeah, that's not conducive to a good work environment, is it, ultimately?
Right.
I would say there's two aspects to this piece as well. One, I would say management itself, especially like more on the people side and less on the technical side, is not for everybody. And that's okay. I don't like when companies put more emphasis on the people managerial side than they do the technical side, or that there's more esteem to it or anything like that, because they're two different tracks. And I really enjoy when companies have those parallel tracks where you can excel in the technical side, you can excel in the people side, or you can even just excel in the contributor side. Like I'm just a very senior developer sort of thing. And being able to articulate and say that people management is not for everybody, and it is a difficult skill that not everybody has, although you can get better at it, right? Like just to say that you don't have it yet, you can get better at it, but it is a skill, and it's a skill that you have to train, you have to practice. And not having that skill in forcing people into directions where they are either not equipped to handle or they are just unwilling to handle because it's not a direction they want to go, like that can be a very bad environment for people to work in, right? And I think that also requires the management side to have some oversight. And I actually recently said this to a coworker, was that I believe, and not everyone shares this opinion, but I believe that the leadership in a team structure ought to have more eyeballs and be under more of a magnifying glass than the contributors. As in, we need to be watching the leaders closer to make sure that they're doing right, not only for themselves, but for their reports, in order to ensure that we have like a healthy and safe environment. And if we're not doing that, then we're failing as leaders because we are potentially leaving, the individual contributors out to dry or dangle, which to me is like that's horrible.
I absolutely agree with that thing of like this job is not for everyone. I was listening to that story and becoming anxious, because in stories like that, and I don't know anything about that story, but in stories like that, what I would like to see happening is a really good manager guiding someone and to help them figure out how they do that technical leadership in ways that is supportive for other team members. And that got me to thinking about leadership, because there's various bits of leadership type stuff that I think I'm okay at. So, having a technical vision, setting a good atmosphere, I hope I'm okay at, including people, hearing different voices. These are things that I try and do, at least. In that sense, some of the leadership stuff, I think, I've learned to do over my career, or I'm trying to learn to do. But the thing of mentoring people in really difficult situations and giving negative feedback and guiding people through to better outcomes through that, it just fills me with terror. And that's why I know I'm not really cut out for that type of role.
I've found that what's most successful for me personally, which I would even say like I'm not always the best judge of what was successful if we're talking about giving negative feedback to somebody, and they may disagree that it was a successful delivery. But in the circumstances that I think have been most well received has been one, when there's a high degree of trust. Like I think that's a requirement, but also when negative feedback is given with the intent to improve the situation for the future. And people that have a high degree of trust that you are giving this feedback so that they can improve, and that the improvement is achievable, it is realistic, and that you will also help be there to like guide them into the better path. Like those have been the most successful times. Like telling somebody like, this is dumb and why did you do it this way? You should never have done it this way. You should have known better. Like that's definitely not constructive. Or even just telling somebody like, hey, you're an abrasive person. I don't like working with you. That is also not super constructive. And it's difficult to deliver feedback to peers, I've found.
Yes.
It's easier to deliver feedback either up or down the leadership chain, but to peers is very, very difficult. And I would actually argue that it's not a constructive thing to even try to do, even though a lot of people will say like, oh, people should work it out and, get into a room and shake hands. It's not necessarily constructive to even try to do that from a leadership perspective. You should kind of have a top-down direction or pushing up the chain, one of the two. But peer-to-peer is usually not very constructive.
Is one of the big problems here that there is only so much you can advance in your career before you get into management? Like you can only become a senior developer and you can only get so much money from just being a developer. And if you want to make more money, essentially, you have to go into management.
It depends on the company. Some companies are well set up to where you can continually advance in each one of those kind of tracks that we talked about, whether it be development itself, individual contributor, people management, or technical leadership. But it also depends on like what the person's individual motivations are. Like not everybody is driven by purely money. Some people are driven by a sense of providing like direction. Some people are driven by being involved in important tasks. Like it really depends on what that person's individual motivations are. And if we're talking about just strictly money, I would say there is a point at which more money can be earned at like the executive level by going into sort of, which is typically classified into like the people management side that is probably the only spot where I would say it's absolutely true that more money can be earned on that side. But that's also like a very small percentage of an overall company, and that well put together companies will make it possible to advance continually in each one of those 3 tracks.
Yeah, 100%. It really depends on the company. And if the company doesn't offer those technical tracks and you want to take one of those technical tracks, then your only option is to look somewhere else. But I will say people management is the most straightforward way to plenty of money, right? If plenty of money is your goal, there are going to be a lot more opportunities by going into people management than becoming a kind of deep technical specialist in some way or having wide technical overview in a company. I think there are just fewer people in those positions than people who are moving up, 1, 2, 3 chains of management.
But there are surely some people who money isn't the primary motivator. Like, as a senior developer, you can earn very good money and then just be happy being a senior developer, right? And just do that forever. And you don't have to progress in your career necessarily. You pay your house off, build your retirement fund, and just write code for a living that you enjoy doing and just have a happy, quiet life.
Definitely. And I think sometimes we forget, so there are roles like, principal engineer or staff engineer or architect or like VP of architecture or things like that some people may aspire to, that may give you more influence over what's happening, may give you more money, or may give you a sense that you've succeeded. But in a lot of companies, if you're a senior engineer or whatever it's called in that company, you're earning a lot more than a lot of people in this world. Maybe you could just be happy.
Yeah, I've had a decent number of conversations with people where they say, like, I want to find out what the next level is for me and how can I get there? And if you tease that apart to like, why? What exactly are you hoping is at the next level? Like, what will actually make that part fulfilling? Is it something you don't find fulfilling now? Is it something you think will be fulfilling later? Like, a lot of times people are like, oh, I have really good ideas and I'm just not listened to. I want to be able to have more influence on the direction of something. And you're like, oh, okay, that's actually that's really good feedback. Here are some different types of roles, or even within your current team, like here are other things that we can give you, like sub projects or whatever, where you do have more autonomy or goals to get to that type of a level. And I found that like people will find doing something like that is pretty fulfilling. And I mean, I don't know where they ultimately end up in their career, right? But trying to tease apart the why you want to get to the next level has been helpful for me.
Absolutely. And wanting influence or wanting to be listened to is just a massive motivator for a lot of technical folks, definitely.
Well, and also you might find yourself in a situation where you're kind of managing people because your manager isn't very good. And so you're having to kind of step up and do a lot of the work that they should be doing. But you also have no authority to do that. And so you kind of need that formal recognition to be able to actually do what you were kind of doing anyway.
Yeah, and that might include, I want to look after these people, but I don't have the ability to argue their case to the management because my actual manager's not doing it. But it could also mean I'm just not getting paid what I should be getting paid for doing all of this hard work.
Well, that's true, but it might just be a case of you actually care about the thing you're working on.
Yeah.
And you want the releases to be of good quality and on time and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And if someone is getting in the way of that, or the atmosphere on the team is not good enough because someone's not doing a good job as a manager, that can be a real motivator that maybe I could do this. Definitely.
And it can also mean too that just might not be the place for you, and which is a really hard decision if you like the team or you like the thing that you're building. But the environment in which the company operates is almost directly tied to one's mental health and how they operate day to day. And being in a bad environment that provides that kind of stress, like my manager's not looking out for us, I'm having to take up for the team. And as long as you've made that grievance known and, you've tried to take that next step, if the company's still like, no, this is our environment, this is how it is, those are sometimes where you have to make hard decisions and decide if that's where you really want to be.
Yeah. And by the way, being a manager is a huge responsibility because for me, at least, who my manager is probably the biggest factor in whether I enjoy my job.
Well, all work is a bit rubbish, ultimately. It's all work, innit?
Yeah.
And it always boils down to the people you work with, whether you're working in a bar or on a team of software engineers.
Absolutely.
If the people you work with are cool, then it makes life that little bit more bearable, doesn't it? Whereas if you don't get on with them, you're just not going to have a good time.
A friend of mine once made a joke and he was like, well, yeah, we're paying you to do it because you wouldn't do it otherwise. Like, of course, there's going to be some level of not fun to it. And it's a funny perspective to put on it.
Yep.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.